The cinematic philosopher Ferris Bueller once said that life moves pretty fast, and if you don't stop and look around once in a while, you might miss it. The ever-growing collection of writings on this page are from my life. Moments spread out over a quarter of a century when I've stopped and looked around once in a while and wrote it down. Not years later and filtered through rose or gray-colored glasses. It's what I saw in that moment. It's what I didn't miss. The Wave. Alone in an Atlanta hotel room, I reach over my son's now-closed novel and press the red end button on my cell phone. The video signal freezes and fades, and my face cracks a smile as a familiar feeling grows slowly and secretly within me. I remember the wave. No, not that kind of wave. Several times per week, 10-year-old Josiah manages to pull himself out of bed before I leave for my morning work train to downtown Chicago. Sometimes he wanders down the darkened stairs in his robe and offers a hug just as I head out the door. And sometimes he comes bounding down only when he hears the roar of my muffler-challenged truck as I turn the key in the ignition. But each day as I back out of the driveway, I glance toward our front door to see if he's there, to see if there's a single hand sticking out, a see ya wave, with the promise of later. On the days that it's there, I stick my hand out as well, and I drive off holding my arms straight and strong in my window, my son holding his until he's completely out of view. It's a good wave, but this is not the wave I remember. For my entire life since my teen years, I can remember my mom's waves as we would head our separate directions. Sometimes it was me doing the leaving, my eyes glued to my rearview mirror and the reflection of her raised right arm, my own left arm raised in answer out the driver's side window, each hand held high and steady until we were completely and utterly out of each other's sight. Even then, my hand would linger for an extra moment or two, just as I knew there was another behind me, unseen but still upraised. Finally, my arm would retreat from the window, my eyes giving full and reluctant attention to the road ahead. Other times our roles would be reversed, me at the curb and she in the car, but our waves were held the same, never lowered with the other in sight. As my kids got older, I taught them always to hold that wave, all the way to the end. And sometimes they would look at me for a nod of permission, and then they'd grin and gallop down the road from our house, waving the whole way, until the taillights of my parents' car could no longer be seen. These are good waves also, but none is the wave that I remember. The wave I remember happened 5 months past my 14th birthday. I stood on the little street adjacent to G-Dorm, a converted World War II Air Force Base barracks in the middle of the Canadian prairie that would be my home for 4 years. My parents had made the hard decision, the right decision, and as I look back across the years from my own parental perspective, the impossible decision. I stood on that warm August morning and watched my family drive away, heading to the Trans-Canadian Highway on the edge of the campus that had grown out of the old military base. There would be snow on the ground when I would see them next, a lifetime for a boy of 14 for whom family had been as much refuge as home. I had studied this day's horizon for months, but the living of a moment is often different than the planning for it, and the hugs were long, the kind where your eyes are closed as tight as your grip. I'm sure there were goodbyes and prayers and fought-back tears, but I don't remember those moments. I remember the car driving slowly away, me standing as tall as my 14-year-old frame could manage, holding my wave, stoic and brave on the outside, robotic and frozen on the inside. I continued to wave as the car reached the stop sign, the brake lights on my dad's 10-year-old Chrysler staring back at me, my world stopping in lockstep for several long and horrifying beats, the point of no return. And then the left turn signal blared on, like a warning sign in the construction zone, the blinking far more steady than my own breathing. The old car hesitated, then swung left, my father's impassive face in the driver's side window, my mother's head twisted in her seat, her eyes searching. And then her face was gone, and all I could see was the right hand stretching and swinging and reaching above the roof from the passenger side, waving as stubbornly as my own. The umbilical cord was cut, no doubt, but there was a promise in the waves, unspoken but not unprayed. Not a goodbye, but an Auf Wiedersehen of her childhood German. Until we meet again. See ya, with the promise of later. We held our waves as we faded from each other's view, me standing on a strange campus in a strange land, watching my parents as they disappeared slowly, heading south toward the States, towards home, 12 hours away. I don't know how long I held that wave, but I held it until finally the awkwardness of holding it became greater than the fear of ending it. That wave stayed with me that fall. It sustained me that fall, until that snow was on the ground and the promise could be kept. And that wave reawakened within me each time I said goodbye to my parents in all the years after my 14th. And then finally, the waves stopped. I stood in my best pressed suit as my mom lay in her soft coffin in a silent building in an unfamiliar city, and I stared at her, hit hard by the finality of our separation. I don't know how long I stood there, but awkwardness isn't as big an issue for a 40-something-year-old man saying goodbye to his mother one last time, and so I stood there until I was ready to not stand there any longer. And then I reached down and I stroked her wrinkled hand and held my hand on hers for a long moment, wanting just one more wave. One more promise. One more anything. 8 years later, in this nondescript Atlanta hotel room, I find myself as far away from my family in terms of mileage as I'd been when I was 14. But while the technology of my youth made a long-distance phone call an event to be planned and savored and budgeted, my own kids' realities are quite different. In their world, long distance is measured only in miles and not in isolation. Through the magic of FaceTime this night, I've said goodnight prayers with Elizabeth, laughed with Noah as he tried to get the dog to react to my voice and face from half a country away, and watched halting video of Benjamin in a middle school basketball game, the action choppy like an old Charlie Chaplin movie, but still a one-home game more than my parents ever saw me play during my teen years. And I've grinned at Josiah as he laid his wet head onto his pillow while listening to Book 6 of Harry Potter in my voice from 800 miles away. Josiah's light turns off in Illinois as my cell hangs up in Atlanta, our good nights lingering in the air, and that old feeling of separation growing in my gut. There's no doubt that my years away in high school have informed my parenting, some ways intentional, some ways not. My job has changed in recent months with my third unexpected trip in the past 6 weeks, and I realize as I stare at the phone that this will eventually be a deal breaker for me. A nightly FaceTime certainly beats the monthly collect phone call from my youth, but it also serves to remind me of the artificiality of these 4 generic walls and of the rich life I'm missing back home. I know too well how waves beget waves, and that long waves and tight hugs are inevitable. But not yet. Not yet. It is now that I recall the wave, and I smile at the memory. Not because it's happy or easy, but because it's familiar and full, like the appearance of an old friend still filled with meaning and history, but the sharp edges worn down by time and distance and perspective. In truth, I don't think about my mother as often as I'd like to say I do. Simply put, mourning ends and life goes on, for middle-agers as well as for teenagers. But there are still times when that 14-year-old in me stirs and feels, and we remember together the wave, and the words unspoken that still have the power to impact me today, the promise that can still sustain, whether through hope or faith or just undying love. Auf Wiedersehen. See ya, with the promise of later.